So to be a school counselor in Texas, you have to have a master's degree. Does your bill require chaplains to have a master's degree?
No.
To be a school counselor in Texas, you have to teach in a classroom for 2 years. Does your bill require a chaplain to teach in a classroom for 2 years?
No, sir.
Does your bill specify any qualifications for chaplains serving in our schools?
I don't think there's any specific qualifications. I trust our school districts to spell out what qualifications they would require. You want to know what I really think, Mr. Tallarico? I think it's preposterous that members in here will defend the acts of certain inappropriate drag shows in our schools and inappropriate material in our libraries, and then
Mr. Hefner, confine your
the
comments.
audacity to say that this is a problem.
I don't know what drag shows have to do with this bill, but I want to ask you about this organization, the National School Chaplain Association. Do you know Rocky Malloy? He's their CEO, testified in favor of the bill in the House and the Senate.
I've met Rocky.
So you have met with Rocky Malloy?
I've met him before.
Has he worked on this bill at all?
They provided some input.
So are you aware that Rocky Malloy has said chaplains are not professional counselors, children don't need professional counseling, they just need to be heard?
I'm not familiar with that.
He said he has a phone app that gives instructions on how to pray with students who are suicidal. Do you believe that the answer to kids who are suicidal is for them to pray and not get professional mental health counseling?
That has nothing to do with this bill.
Rocky Malloy has stated he wants chaplains going in to teachers' classrooms and reviewing every single book available to students. Do you, as the bill author, want chaplains censoring or banning books in libraries or classrooms? No. Are you familiar that Rocky Malloy describes himself as a former drug smuggling pirate saved by divine intervention?
I'm not aware.
And he's admitted to being convicted of international drug trafficking?
I'm not advised.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Happy post-Super Tuesday, everyone. Here in Texas, Colin Allred is officially the Democratic challenger for Ted Cruz's Senate seat, but also the local school districts are fighting back against Republican state oversight and overreaching. Now, for those of you who aren't from this part of the country, our state government in Texas is run by some of the worst Republicans, and for being the party of small government, they are known to interfere in local governments all the time, especially in blue districts and blue counties. Most major cities in Texas are reliably blue, including Austin, San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, and El Paso, but local leaders are constantly having to deal with state overreach into local politics and governance. For example, last week in Austin, schools overwhelmingly rejected a move by Republican state legislatures that sought to install religious chaplains in public schools in lieu of school counselors. Democratic State Representative from the Austin area, James Tallarico, self-identifies as a practicing Christian, but he's been outspoken against the Texas Republican Party for constantly pushing Christian nationalist policies on a populace that simply does not want them.
We are here to celebrate an important victory in the fight against Christian nationalism. There was a bill passed in the last legislative session that would allow school districts to replace school counselors with untrained, unsupervised, unqualified religious chaplains. We had folks speak out against this bill from across the political spectrum, from across different faith traditions, from across different communities. And we are proud to announce that 25 of the biggest school districts in Texas have rejected this policy at the local level.
The most ardent supporters of the bill argue that these quote-unquote untrained, unsupervised, and unqualified religious chaplains wouldn't have replaced school counselors but only supplemented them, but that's clearly not the point. Local groups across the state, including several faith-based groups, oppose the bill on the grounds that church and state are meant to be kept separate, and the public school system is decidedly part of the state.
And this threat to democracy has made its way to Congress. I mean, my colleague, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, has said, quote, Christian nationalism is actually a good thing. It is an identity that Republicans need to embrace, and I am being attacked by the godless left because I said I am a proud Christian nationalist, end quote. My colleague, Representative Lowen Boebert, said, quote, the church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk, end quote, junk being the Constitution and Bill of Rights. The Bible itself in 2 Corinthians actually warns us against this. Paul warned against this. He warned us against people who would preach of a Christ that differs from the true Christ that we learn about in the Bible. That's exactly what Christian nationalism is doing. I condemn religious extremism everywhere, globally and domestically, and we have to recognize the threat it poses to our most sacred freedoms and root it out everywhere. And I think it's incumbent, especially upon us as Christians, and me as a Christian, to be at the forefront of the fight to ensure that white nationalism and Christian nationalism doesn't see the light of day. Thank you, and I yield back.
I want to tell all my colleagues here what I told the Republicans in that room last night. I don't believe there are any coincidences in a matter like this. I believe that Scripture, the Bible, is very clear that God is the one that raises up those in authority. He raised up each of you, all of us. And I believe that God has ordained and allowed each one of us to be brought here for this specific moment in this time. This is my belief. I believe that each one of us has a huge responsibility today to use the gifts that God has given us to serve the extraordinary people of this great country, and they deserve it.
The House of Representatives finally has a new speaker, and it's none other than Congressman Mike Johnson of Louisiana, a man with a name so generic it's absolutely forgettable, but also a congressman that many of us have never even heard of. But the things we have heard of him haven't been great. With all of the dysfunction and disruption surrounding the House speakership, when the likes of Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan were at times the frontrunners for the position, the prognosis for the eventual speaker was never going to be great. It seems it was always going to be a situation when Republicans would just get tired of not having a speaker anymore. They would eventually just get tired of having to stay in D.C. to participate in vote after vote. They would eventually want to go home, so they would eventually just say, sure, whatever, this guy.
How does that make you guys look?
Makes us look like a bunch of idiots.
This is petty. This is petty, and I'm getting freaking tired of it.
We're a ship that doesn't have a rudder right now, and I'm thoroughly disappointed in the process.
This is not responsible. We need to elect a speaker.
We've allowed emotion to get in the way of logic.
People are looking for a perfect system. They shouldn't be looking at the U.S. House right now.
And so now we've got Mike Johnson a hop and a skip away from the presidency, a man who now is best known for being an election denier, for being against abortion rights, and for being against gay marriage. And speaking of abortion, he also doesn't like contraceptive. It never made any sense to me how someone could be against both abortion and contraception, especially as a man, but I'm also not a Christian nationalist. Oh yeah, and he's that too, if you couldn't tell. With Johnson's ascension to speakership, the Freedom Caucus has successfully enacted minority rule within the lower house. Members of the Freedom Caucus hold views that are not widely held across the country or even within Congress, and they're known for being boisterous, stubborn, obstructive, and manipulative. Case in point, the Freedom Caucus first obstructed former Speaker Kevin McCarthy's vote into the role until they obtained certain concessions from McCarthy. Then, Freedom Caucus member Matt Gaetz called for his removal when McCarthy acted in a way that Gaetz didn't approve of. When many of the Freedom Caucus members then sided with Democrats to vote for McCarthy's removal, they then tried to install Jim Jordan, one of the worst of them, as Speaker. Jordan would be unable to secure the necessary majority to win the speakership, but eventually they were able to shoehorn Mike Johnson, a lesser-known member, into a very significant leadership role. The Freedom Caucus has now elevated itself and expanded its influence within government, and with that, Christian nationalism now has a place at the congressional table. Several members of the Freedom Caucus are outspoken Christian nationalists. They don't believe in the separation of church and state, and they believe that Christian nationalism should be widely accepted as part of the general Republican platform. Donald Trump seems to be falling in line with this thinking, recently declaring that if he's elected president, he would turn away immigrants who don't like, quote, our religion. This is the same guy who couldn't name a single book in the Bible immediately after claiming that the Bible was his favorite book.